Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a story that's going to feel like opening a beautiful music box, only to find the mechanism inside is broken, the gears are rusted, and the song it plays is one of loss. You know Caroline Ingalls. You've seen her in the Little House books, heard her called Ma, watched her keep a perfect home on the prairie. She's the pioneer mother, the woman who never complained, the one who made a home out of dirt walls and optimism. But tonight, you're not meeting that Carolyn. Tonight, you're meeting the real one. The woman who was a teacher before she was a wife. The woman who had dreams before she had daughters. The woman who watched grasshoppers, billions of them, a living, churning cloud, destroy every single thing she'd worked for in less time than it takes to bake bread. You're about to walk into the summer of 1874 into southwestern Minnesota, into a moment when the sky turned dark at noon and the sound of wings drowned out every prayer. This isn't the story you learned in school. This is the story Caroline lived, and then buried, and then her daughter Laura dug up, polished, and sold as something beautiful. But you're going to see what was underneath. Dim your lights, get comfortable, and let's walk into the truth. You're standing in a one-room schoolhouse in Concord, Wisconsin. It's October 1858, and you're 19 years old. Your name is Carolyn Lake Quiner, and you're holding a piece of chalk in your hand that's already worn down to a nub because you've been teaching these children their letters all morning and your fingers are covered in white dust. The children are restless. It's harvest season outside, and half of them would rather be in the fields helping their fathers than sitting here conjugating verbs. But you keep them focused. You always do. Because this teaching, this work, is the only respectable way a woman like you can earn money without a husband. And you need the money. Let me tell you who you are before the grasshoppers, before the dugouts, before the endless moving. You were born December the 12th, 1839, in Brookfield, Wisconsin, 15 miles west of what would become Milwaukee. Your father was Henry Newcomb Quiner, a trader who worked with Native Americans and sailed Lake Michigan's unpredictable waters, hauling lumber. Your mother was Charlotte Wallace Tucker Quiner, a woman who had already buried one child before you were born. Yeah, you were the fifth of 7 children who survived. There were 3 brothers, Joseph, Henry, Thomas, 3 sisters, Martha Jane, yourself, and little Eliza, who came 3 years after you. The family wasn't wealthy, but your father made a decent living. You had a frame house, real walls, windows with glass. And then, in 1845, when you were 5 years old, your father's schooner was lost in a storm near the Mackinac Straits. He drowned. And just like that, everything changed. Your mother was left with 7 children and no income, no life insurance, no safety net. Just the knowledge that in 1840s America, a widow with children was one bad winter away from destitution. She remarried eventually to a man named Frederick Holbrook, and the family moved to Concord in Jefferson County. But you never forgot what it felt like to watch your mother's face when she realized she was alone. You never forgot the fear. So you learned early, women need to be able to take care of themselves, even if society says they shouldn't have to. You went to school. You were studious, serious, the kind of girl who paid attention, who remembered everything, who understood that education was the only insurance policy a woman could buy for herself. And when you turned 16, you became a teacher. It wasn't glamorous work. Your contract from October 1858 shows you were paid $10 per month, and that was for teaching a 3-month term, $30 total, for 12 weeks of work, 6 days a week. Managing children aged 5 to 15 in a one-room schoolhouse, where you had to arrive early to start the fire in winter and stay late to clean the slates. But it was your money, your work, your independence, and you were good at it. You can picture yourself there, can't you? Standing at the front of that classroom, your dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, your dress simple but clean, your voice firm but kind. You didn't yell. You didn't need to. The children respected you because you respected them. And then, one day, you met a man with a fiddle. His name was Charles Philip Ingalls, and he was everything your father had been. Charming, optimistic, a dreamer who believed that somewhere out there, just over the next hill, there was a better life waiting. He was also restless. You could see that right away. The way his eyes would drift to the horizon when he talked. The way he'd get excited about stories of a land opening up in the West, of opportunities, of fresh starts. But he was kind, and he made you laugh. And when he asked you to marry him, you said yes. On February 1st, 1860, you became Mrs. Charles Ingalls. You were 20 years old, and your teaching career was over, because that's how it worked. Married women didn't teach. They kept house. They raised children. They followed their husbands wherever the next dream took them. You didn't know it yet, but you were about to spend the next 14 years moving. Wisconsin to Kansas, Kansas back to Wisconsin, Wisconsin to Minnesota, Minnesota to Iowa. Always moving, always chasing Charles's next plan, and you'd never teach again, but you'd never stop being a teacher. You'd teach your daughters to read, to write, to survive. You'd teach them that women could be strong even when they had no power, that they could endure even when they had no choice. And one of those daughters, Laura, would grow up to write books that made you famous. But she'd never tell this part. She'd never write about the woman you were before you became Ma. The woman who had her own money, her own work, her own life. She'd write about the woman who followed Pa wherever he wanted to go. And that woman was about to learn what it cost to have no control over your own life. You're in a covered wagon now. It's May 1874, and you're 34 years old. Your husband is driving. Your 3 daughters, Mary, 9 years old, Laura, 7, and Carrie, not quite 5, are squeezed in beside you among the household goods. You've done this before. This moving, this packing up and starting over. You've lived in Wisconsin, in Kansas, where you all nearly died of malaria and had to leave land that Charles had no legal right to claim in the first place. Back to Wisconsin. And now you're heading to Minnesota, to a town called Walnut Grove, where Charles has heard there's good land available. He's excited. He always is at the start. This time it'll be different, Carolyn, he says. And you nod. Because what else can you do? You know the pattern by now. He'll file a claim. He'll build something. He'll plant crops. And then something will go wrong, and you'll pack up the wagon again. But this time, you let yourself hope. Because Walnut Grove isn't wilderness. It's a real town. It was founded in 1870, and by 1874 it has a population of around 300 people. There's a church, a school, stores, other families. Your daughters could have friends. They could go to school with other children. Mary is smart, so smart, and she loves to read. Laura is wild and curious, always watching, always remembering. Carrie is still small, still needs you every minute, and you're tired. So tired. Tired of moving. Tired of making a home in one place only to abandon it for the next. Tired of sleeping in wagons and cooking over open fires and hauling water and washing clothes in creeks and watching your husband's dreams crumble and starting over. You want to stop. And when Charles finds land along Plum Creek, a mile and a half north of Walnut Grove, you let yourself believe that maybe this time it really will be different. The land is beautiful. Rolling prairie, a creek with actual running water, plum thickets, timber for building, the kind of place where you could make a life. Charles files a preemption claim, 160 acres, on May 28, 1874. The deal is simple. If you live on the land and improve it, you can buy it from the government for $1.25 to $2.50 per acre. It's not free like a homestead claim, but it's doable. And Charles has a plan. He'll plant wheat. A whole field of it. Wheat prices are good. If the crop comes in, you'll have enough money to pay off the land, buy supplies for next year, maybe even build a proper house with real walls and a wood floor. But first you need somewhere to live, so Charles builds you a dugout. Now, let me explain what a dugout is, because Laura's books make it sound almost cozy, quaint. Like a little underground fairy house. It's not. A dugout is a hole carved into the side of a creek bank or ravine. Charles dug into the bank of Plum Creek, creating a space about 12 feet by 14 feet. The walls are packed earth. The roof is sod, layers of prairie grass and dirt held up by wooden supports. There's a door made of rough planks, one small window. Inside, the air is damp. It smells like dirt and roots and creek water. When it rains, water seeps through the walls, Bugs live in the ceiling, spiders, beetles, ants. At night you can hear mice scratching in the walls, but it's shelter, and you've lived in worse. You set up your household, the bed, the stove. Thank God for the stove, because cooking over an open fire in an enclosed space would be impossible. The table, the chairs, the few dishes you've managed to keep through all the moves. You hang a curtain to separate the sleeping area from the living area. You sweep the dirt floor every day, even though it's pointless because it's dirt, but you sweep it anyway because that's what women do. You try to make it home, and you plant a garden. This is your work, your domain. While Charles breaks the prairie sod and plants his wheat, you plant vegetables, potatoes, carrots, onions, beans, squash. This garden isn't decorative, it's survival. If the wheat fails, your family will live on whatever you can grow and preserve. So you work in that garden every single day. You haul water from Plum Creek, gallons and gallons of it, because prairie soil is dry and vegetables need water. You pull weeds, you check for insects. Your daughters help. Mary's old enough to be genuinely useful now. Laura is enthusiastic but easily distracted. Carrie mostly gets in the way, but she tries. And for a few weeks it's almost nice. The dugout is cool in the heat. The creek provides water and a place for the girls to play. The plum thickets are full of fruit. Your daughters come home with their hands and faces stained purple, happy and full. Charles's wheat is growing, knee-high by June, green and healthy. He walks through that field every evening, and you can see the hope in his face. This is going to work. This time, it's really going to work. And you let yourself believe it too. You let yourself imagine next year. Charles building a real house. He's already talking about it, already planning. A frame house with a wood floor and glass windows and enough room that the girls can have their own space. You imagine Mary and Laura walking to school in Walnut Grove, carrying their slates and lunch pails. You imagine going to church on Sundays, sitting with other women, having conversations about something other than survival. You imagine staying, and then, in June, the sky goes dark. You're in the dugout when you first hear it. A sound like distant thunder. Except it doesn't stop. It gets louder, closer. You step outside, and you see it. A cloud on the horizon. Massive. Moving fast. And as it gets closer, you realize it's not a cloud. It's insects, billions of them, grasshoppers, and they're coming straight for you. The sound hits you first. It's not like anything you've heard before. Not wind, not rain, not thunder. It's a roar, but it's also a hum. A vibration that seems to come from everywhere at once, from the air itself, from inside your own chest. You're standing outside the dugout and you're watching that cloud on the horizon get closer, and your brain is trying to make sense of what you're seeing. Because clouds don't move that fast. Clouds don't shimmer like that. Clouds don't... And then you realize, those aren't clouds. They're insects. Your first thought is to get the children inside. Mary and Laura are down by the creek, and you can hear yourself shouting their names, your voice high and sharp in a way that makes them come running immediately because they know that tone. That's the tone that means danger. Carrie is already clinging to your skirt, and you scoop her up with one arm just as Mary and Laura come scrambling up the creek bank, their faces confused and frightened. Inside, you say, now. And you herd them into the dugout and shut the door, but it doesn't matter, because the locusts don't care about doors. Through the small window you watch them arrive, and it's like watching the end of the world. The sky goes dark, not evening dark, not storm dark. A strange, flickering darkness as billions of bodies block out the sun. The light that does get through is green-tinted, filtered through translucent wings. And the sound. Oh God, the sound! It's deafening. The beating of trillions of wings creates a noise so loud you have to shout to be heard. It sounds like a train that never stops coming. Like the air itself is being torn apart. And then they land. They land on the roof of the dugout. You can hear the impact of bodies hitting the sod, thousands of tiny thuds per second. They land on the door, on the walls, on the ground outside so thickly that you can't see the grass anymore. Just a writhing carpet of brown and yellow bodies. And then they start getting inside, through the cracks around the door, through the window frame, through gaps in the sod roof. They fall from the ceiling, land in your hair, on your shoulders, on the table, in the water bucket. Laura screams. Mary is frozen, her face white. Carrie is sobbing into your neck. And you're trying to stay calm, trying to think, trying to figure out what to do, but your hands are shaking as you grab a dish towel and start sweeping the insects off the table, off the stove, out of the water bucket. But for every one you kill, 10 more come in. They're everywhere, crawling on the walls, on the bed, on the girls' dresses, in your hair. You can feel their legs on your skin, their wings brushing against your face, and it takes everything you have not to scream yourself. Outside, you can hear Charles shouting. He's out there in the wheat field, and you already know that the crop is gone. You don't know how long you stay in that dugout. Time loses meaning when you're surrounded by insects. Hours, maybe. Long enough that your arms ache from constantly brushing locusts off the children. Long enough that Carrie cries herself to sleep in your lap. Long enough that the sound of wings becomes almost normal, just background noise. The way you stop noticing the sound of rain after a while. Except rain doesn't crawl into your mouth when you try to speak. Finally, the sound starts to diminish. The darkness lifts. The insects stop coming through the cracks, and when you open the door and step outside, you see what they've done. The wheat field is gone, not damaged, not partially eaten. Gone. Where there was green wheat, knee-high and healthy and full of promise, there are now just stalks. Bare, stripped stalks standing in neat rows like the skeletons of plants. Every leaf, every blade, every kernel, eaten. Charles is standing in the middle of the field. He's not moving. He's just standing there, staring at nothing. And you know that look. You've seen it before, in Kansas, when things fell apart. It's the look of a man watching his dreams die in real time. You walk toward him, crunching locusts under your feet with every step. The ground is covered with them. Dead ones, dying ones, fat ones that have gorged themselves and can barely move. The smell is indescribable. A mix of crushed insects, excrement, and something acrid and chemical that makes your eyes water. Charles, you say softly. He doesn't respond at first. Then he turns to you and his face is blank. It's all gone, Carolyn, he says. All of it. And you nod. Because what else can you do? Your garden is destroyed too. The potato plants are stripped to stumps. The bean poles are bare sticks. The squash leaves are gone. Even the onion tops have been eaten. But it's worse than that. You notice it when you walk back toward the dugout. The locusts have eaten the bark off the plum trees. They've chewed the wooden handle of the axe Charles left leaning against the wall. They've eaten holes in the flour sack that was hanging outside. They've even gnawed at the leather harness for the horses. These insects don't just eat crops. They eat everything, and they're still everywhere. Covering the ground, covering the walls of the dugout, covering the creek bank, thick enough that you have to wade through them, kicking them aside with your feet, and the crunch, crunch, crunch sound makes your stomach turn. Mary comes to stand beside you. She's trying to be brave, trying not to cry, but her voice shakes when she speaks. Will they come back, Ma? And you want to tell her no. You want to tell her it's over. They're gone. Everything will be fine now. But you don't know. So you do what mothers do. You lie. No, darling, you say, smoothing her hair. They're leaving. See? They're flying away. And it's true. The locusts are taking off again, rising into the air in clouds, moving on to destroy someone else's farm, someone else's hope. But what you don't know, what none of you know yet, is that they've left something behind. Let me tell you about the Rocky Mountain locust, because understanding what just happened to you requires understanding what these creatures are. Their scientific name is Melanoplus spretus. They're a species of grasshopper native to the river valleys on the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains, places like Montana, Wyoming, Colorado. In their normal, solitary phase, they're harmless. Just ordinary grasshoppers, munching on prairie grass, bothering no one. But when conditions are right, when there's drought, when their population density gets too high, When temperatures hit certain thresholds, something changes. They transform. It's called the gregarious phase. Solitary grasshoppers that normally avoid each other suddenly start clustering together. Their behavior changes. Their body chemistry changes. They become restless, agitated, hungry, and they swarm. The swarm that just destroyed your wheat field is part of the largest animal congregation in recorded human history. Scientists will later estimate that this particular swarm, the one that swept across the Great Plains in 1874, contained approximately 12.5 trillion locusts and covered an area of 198,000 square miles. That's larger than the state of California. It's a swarm so vast that when it passed over Nebraska, it took 5 days to completely pass over a single location. Witnesses describe the swarm as being half a mile high and blocking out the sun for hours, and you're standing in the middle of it. The destruction is total. Across Minnesota, across Kansas, across Nebraska, and the Dakotas and Montana, farmers are stepping out of their homes and staring at fields that are just gone. Gone in hours. An entire year's work erased in the time it takes to eat lunch. The economic damage will eventually be calculated at around $2 million, and that's in 1874 dollars. Adjusted for inflation, that's somewhere north of 40 million in today's money. But numbers don't capture it. Numbers don't tell you what it feels like to watch insects eat the curtains off your windows, to find them in your flower bin, in your water bucket, in your children's beds. To step outside and feel them crunch under your feet like snow. Numbers don't tell you what it's like to realize that you have no income now, no harvest, no money, nothing, and winter is coming. Charles doesn't give up. You'll give him that. He never gives up. Within a day he's making plans. He'll go east to the farms in the counties that the locusts didn't hit. They'll need extra workers for the harvest. He can earn wages, maybe enough to get through the winter. I'll only be gone a few weeks, he tells you. Maybe a month, 2 at most. You nod. You knew this was coming. This is what frontier men do when disaster strikes. They leave. They go find work. They send money back when they can. And the women stay. Because someone has to watch the children. That someone has to keep the household running. Someone has to be there. So Charles packs a small bag. He takes what little money you have left, a few dollars, maybe enough for a week's food, and he starts walking. 300 miles. That's how far he'll walk to find work. 300 miles on foot, sleeping in barns and under bridges, eating whatever he can afford, just to earn wages to send back to his family. And you're left alone in a dugout with 3 children and a ruined garden and locusts still covering every surface outside. Welcome to frontier life. Isn't it romantic? You want to know the worst part? It's not the hunger, it's not even the poverty, it's the waiting. Days turn into weeks, and you don't hear from Charles. You don't know where he is, if he found work, if he's alive. There's no telegraph in Walnut Grove. Mail is slow and expensive, and Charles probably doesn't have money for postage anyway. So you wait. You ration the food you have left. Flour, a little cornmeal, some beans. You stretch it as far as it will go, making bread with less flour and more water so it goes further. You tell the girls you're not hungry when they ask why you're not eating much. You haul water from Plum Creek. You wash clothes, even though it seems pointless when everything is covered in dead locusts. You try to salvage something, anything from the garden. A few small potatoes that the locusts missed, some onions. You keep the girls occupied. You teach them their letters, their numbers. You tell them stories. You make it seem like everything is normal, like Pa's just away for a little while. Well, like there's nothing to worry about. And at night, after they're asleep, you sit by the small window and you stare out at the devastated landscape, and you let yourself feel it. The fear, the exhaustion, the crushing weight of having no control over anything. You're 34 years old. You've been married for 14 years. You've lived in 5 different places. You've given birth to 3 daughters and watched Charles chase dream after dream, and you're so tired. But you can't say that. You can't tell anyone. Because women don't complain. Women endure, women make do. That's what you were taught, what society expects, what your role demands. So you endure, and you don't know it yet, but this is only the beginning. The neighbours are in the same situation. The whole community of Walnut Grove is reeling. Every farm in the area was hit, every crop destroyed. The women gather sometimes near the church or at the general store in town, and you can see it in their faces, the same exhaustion, the same fear. Some of them whisper about leaving, going back east to families who might take them in. Some of them talk about aid, about whether the government will help, but mostly you don't talk about it. You exchange news about husbands who've left to find work. You share what little food you can spare. You watch each other's children, and you pretend everything is fine. There's a woman named Mrs. Bedall, whose husband runs the post office. She has 4 children, and her husband can't leave because someone has to keep the post office open. So they're surviving on credit from the store, on promises to pay later when times are better. There's another woman, you don't know her name, who shows up at church one Sunday with a black eye. Everyone pretends not to notice. You know what happened. You've heard the stories. When men feel helpless, when they watch their crops fail and their families go hungry, sometimes they lash out, and their wives take the brunt of it. You're lucky, you tell yourself. Charles has never hit you. He's never blamed you for any of this. But he's also never asked you what you think, never consulted you before filing another claim, making another plan, moving the family again, because that's not how it works. Husbands decide, wives follow, and right now your husband is 300 miles away and you're alone. Charles comes back in late August, almost 6 weeks after he left. He's thinner, his clothes are worn, and he looks older than when he left. But he has money, $20, maybe $25, enough to buy flour and beans and salt pork, enough to get through another month, maybe 2. Did you find work, you ask? Some, he says. Harvested wheat in Dodge County. Wages weren't much, but it's something. You nod. You don't ask him about the journey, about where he slept, about whether he was scared or lonely or desperate. You just heat water so he can wash, and you make a meal with the supplies he brought, and you listen to him tell the girls stories about the farms he saw, the people he met. And you notice something in his voice, something forced, like he's trying to convince himself that everything is going to be okay. That night, after the girls are asleep, he tells you his plan. I'll plant wheat again next spring, he says. The grasshoppers are gone now, they won't come back. We'll get a crop next year and we'll be fine. You want to believe him? You want to believe that this was just bad luck, a one-time disaster, something you can recover from. But you've heard the talk in town. You've heard the old-timers saying that grasshopper plagues come in cycles, that sometimes they last for years, and you've seen something that Charles hasn't. Something that makes your stomach clench every time you think about it. The eggs. When you were cleaning the dugout, sweeping out dead locusts, you noticed the ground outside looked strange. Pocked. Like something had been digging tiny holes everywhere. And you remember reading once, years ago, and something about how grasshoppers lay their eggs in the soil. You don't tell Charles. What would be the point? He's already made his decision. You'll stay. You'll try again. But deep down, you know. Those eggs are still there, buried in the soil all around you. Millions of them. Maybe billions. And when spring comes, when the weather warms, they're going to hatch. This isn't over. It's only just beginning. Winter comes, and with it, a dangerous thing. Hope. You're standing in the dugout in November, and you can see frost forming on the inside walls where your breath meets the cold air. The girls are huddled under every blanket you own, and Charles is talking about next year like it's a promise instead of a prayer. The grasshoppers won't come back, he says. Lightning doesn't strike twice. You don't point out that the saying doesn't really apply to insects. You just nod and stir the thin soup you're making from beans and the last of the salt pork. Because what else can you do? You can't change the past. You can't control the future. All you can do is get through today, and then tomorrow, and then the day after that, and hope that Charles is right. The winter is hard, but you've survived hard winters before. You ration the supplies Charles brought back from his harvest work. You make bread with less flour, soup with more water. You tell the girls stories instead of lighting candles because candles cost money you don't have. The cold is brutal. Minnesota winters don't care about your problems. The temperature drops so low that the water in your bucket freezes overnight, and even inside the dugout. You wake up in the morning and have to break the ice with a spoon just to have water to cook with. The girls get sick. Nothing serious, just coughs, sniffles, the kind of thing that every child gets in winter. But without money for a doctor, without proper medicine, even a simple cold becomes terrifying. You sit up at night listening to Carrie wheeze, putting your hand on her forehead to check for fever, praying that it doesn't turn into pneumonia because you don't know what you'll do if it does. But they recover. Children are resilient like that. And slowly, winter starts to loosen its grip. By March 1875, you can feel it. The air is still cold, but there's a different quality to it now. The sun stays up a little longer each day. The snow starts to melt. Plum Creek, which was frozen solid all winter, begins to flow again. And Charles starts making plans. "I'm going to build us a real house," he announces one morning. "You're washing dishes, or rather, rinsing them with the last of the water because you're too tired to haul more from the creek right now, and you pause with your hands in the basin." "A house?" you repeat. "A frame house," he says, and his voice has that quality it always gets when he's excited about something. That brightness, that certainty. With lumber, a wood floor, real windows, 20 feet by 24 feet, high ceilings, multiple rooms. You dry your hands on your apron and turn to look at him. "Charles," you say carefully, "we don't have money for lumber." "We'll buy it on credit," he says. "The crop this year will pay for it. The grasshoppers are gone." "Caroline, they're not coming back. We'll get a good harvest, pay off the lumber, and we'll finally have a real home." And there it is. The same optimism that's gotten you into this situation in the first place. The same belief that this time, things will be different. You want to argue. You want to point out that you still don't know if those eggs in the ground are going to hatch. You want to remind him that you've heard this promise before, in Wisconsin, in Kansas, in every place you've ever lived. But you're also tired of living in a dugout. Tired of dirt walls and sod roofs and mice in the ceiling, tired of being damp and cold and cramped, and so you make a choice. You choose to believe him. "All right," you say, "a house." His face lights up like you've given him a gift, and maybe you have. Maybe hope is the only gift any of you have left. Charles orders the lumber from a supplier in town. It arrives in April, wagon after wagon of boards, fresh cut and smelling like pine. The cost is staggering, more money than you've ever spent on anything in your life. But Charles is undaunted. He starts building. You watch him work. He's good with his hands, always has been. He lays the foundation, frames the walls, installs the windows, real glass windows, 5 of them, and hangs the doors. 20 feet by 24 feet. That's 480 square feet of space. Compared to the dugout's 168 square feet, it feels massive, 10 feet high. You'll be able to stand up straight without feeling like the ceiling is pressing down on you. 5 doors. You're not entirely sure why you need 5 doors. But Charles insists it's important for ventilation, for access, for practicality. 3 windows. Light. Real, honest-to-God, natural light streaming into your home. It takes him weeks, working from dawn until dark. The girls help where they can. Laura is particularly enthusiastic, though her help mostly consists of holding nails and asking questions. Mary is more careful, more methodical. Carrie mostly plays in the lumber scraps, building little houses for her rag doll. And you? You plant your garden again. Because that's what women do. While men build structures, women plant food. While men create shelter, women create sustenance. You dig the same plot you dug last year. The soil still has that pocked look from where the locusts laid their eggs, and you try not to think about it. You tell yourself Charles is right. The grasshoppers are gone. They won't come back. You plant potatoes, carrots, beans, squash, onions. You haul water from Plum Creek. You pull weeds. You watch the tiny green shoots emerge from the soil, and you feel something dangerous stirring in your chest. Hope. By May, the house is finished. Charles carries you over the threshold like you're newlyweds, and the girls laugh, and for one perfect moment, it feels like everything is going to be okay. The house is beautiful. There's a main room with the stove and a table and chairs. There's a sleeping area separated by a curtain. There's actual space to move around without constantly bumping into furniture or children. The wood floor feels like luxury under your feet. No more dirt that turns to mud when it rains. No more sweeping a floor that can never actually be clean because it's made of earth. And the windows. Oh, the windows. Light pours in, bright and warm, and you realise you'd forgotten what it was like to live in a space that wasn't dim and shadowy all the time. You arrange your few possessions, the dishes, the linens, the girls' clothes. Everything has a place now. That night, you all sleep in the new house for the first time. The girls are giddy, running from room to room, marvelling at the space. Charles is satisfied, proud of what he's built. And you lie awake in bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a frame house, the creak of boards settling, the whisper of wind against the walls, and you think about the debt you now owe, hundreds of dollars, for lumber, for nails, for windows and doors and everything else that went into this beautiful, expensive structure. And the only way to pay it is with wheat. Charles has already planted it. The field is green again, the crop is growing, and every day you look at it, you tell yourself it's going to be fine. But at night, in the dark, you remember the eggs. It happens in late April, early May. The exact date doesn't matter because the result is the same. You're in the garden, checking on the potato plants, when you notice movement in the soil. At first, you think it's ants, but then you look closer and your stomach drops. They're hatching. Tiny locusts, nymphs they're called, are emerging from the ground. Hundreds of them, thousands of them, in the field, in the garden. Everywhere the adult locusts laid their eggs the previous summer. They're small, maybe half an inch long, wingless. They look almost harmless, like ordinary baby grasshoppers, but they're not harmless. They're hungry. You drop your gardening tools and run to the house. "Charles!" you shout. "Charles, they're hatching!" He comes outside and you watch his face as he sees them. The colour drains from his skin. His jaw goes tight. "It's fine," he says, but his voice is too loud, too forced. "They're just babies. They can't fly. We'll stop them before they do any damage." And you want to believe him? You want to believe that wingless baby locusts can be stopped, can be controlled, can be defeated. But you've seen what their parents did, and these babies are born hungry. The nymphs don't swarm like the adults did. They don't fly in vast clouds that darken the sky. Instead, they crawl. They emerge from the ground in biblical numbers and they start moving. Across fields, across roads, across everything. A writhing carpet of brown bodies, all heading in the same direction, all eating everything in their path. They're slower than the adults. That's the only mercy. It takes them days instead of hours to destroy a field. But the result is the same. Charles tries to stop them. He digs trenches and fills them with burning straw, hoping the nymphs will die in the flames. Some do, but most just crawl over the bodies of their dead siblings and keep going. He builds hopper dozers, contraptions made of metal sheets smeared with coal tar, drag through the fields to catch the nymphs, and it works, sort of. The tar traps them, and they die, stuck to the metal. But for every 100 you kill, 1,000 more keep coming. The neighbours try too. Everyone in Walnut Grove is fighting the same battle. You can see smoke rising from fields all around as farmers burn their crops, trying to destroy the nymphs before they can eat everything. It doesn't work. Nothing works. By June, your garden is gone again. The potato plants are stripped, the bean poles are bare, the squash is destroyed, and Charles's wheat, the wheat he planted to pay for the lumber, the wheat that was supposed to save you, gone. For the second year in a row, you stand in a field of destroyed crops and watch your husband's face as he realizes you have no income, no harvest, no way to pay your debts. And this time, it's worse, because this time you owe money. Real money. For lumber and nails and windows and the beautiful house that now feels like a monument to failure. Let me tell you what happens to a person's mind when disaster strikes twice. The first time, it's shock, horror, fear. But also a kind of belief that it's temporary, that you'll recover, that this is just a setback. The second time, it's despair. Because the second time, you understand that this isn't bad luck. This is a pattern. This is your life now. You're standing in the kitchen of your beautiful new house, the house you can't afford, the house that's now a millstone around your neck, and you're trying to figure out how to feed your family with no money and no food. Charles is talking about going east again. Finding harvest work, earning wages. He's already planning his route, figuring out how far he'll need to walk, and you're nodding, saying, yes, that's a good plan, that'll work. But inside, something is breaking. You're 35 years old. You've been married for 15 years. You've lived in 6 different places. You've lost 2 wheat crops to locusts. You're in debt. Your husband is about to leave again, and you're going to be alone with 3 children in the middle of a plague. And you can't tell anyone how you feel, because women don't fall apart. Women don't complain. Women don't admit that they're drowning. There's a term the other women use when they think no one's listening. Prairie madness, they call it. The thing that happens to women on the frontier when the isolation and the hardship and the endless work and the lack of control become too much. Women who stop speaking, women who stop eating, women who walk out into the prairie and don't come back. You're not there. Not yet. You're still functioning. Still cooking and cleaning and caring for your children. Still keeping up appearances. But you can feel it. The edge. The place where endurance ends and something else begins. And you're terrified of what happens if you reach it. There's a meeting at the church. The whole community gathers to discuss what to do. Families are leaving, packing up their wagons and heading back east, admitting defeat. Others are staying but desperate for help. Someone suggests writing to the governor. Minnesota has a new governor now, John Pillsbury, and maybe he'll provide relief. Money, food, something. There's debate. Some people argue that accepting government help is shameful, that real pioneers are self-sufficient. Others point out that self-sufficiency is impossible when locusts eat everything you own. Charles doesn't say much, but you can see him listening, calculating, trying to figure out a path forward. After the meeting, a neighbour, a woman whose name you can't remember because you're so tired you can't remember anything anymore, pulls you aside. "How are you holding up?" she asks quietly. And you open your mouth to say, "Fine," because that's what you always say. That's what women say. But what comes out instead is, "I don't know." She squeezes your hand. She doesn't say anything else. She doesn't need to. Because she knows. They all know. Every woman in this community is fighting the same battle against despair, against the crushing weight of circumstances they can't control. And none of you can admit it. Because admitting it would mean acknowledging that the pioneer dream, the narrative of westward expansion and self-made success, is a lie. So you go home. You put on a brave face for your daughters. You tell them everything will be fine, and you don't sleep that night. You lie in bed in your beautiful, expensive, debt-ridden house, and you stare at the ceiling, and you wonder how many more times you can do this, how many more times you can watch hope die, how many more times you can pick yourself up and keep going, and you don't have an answer. Charles leaves in July. He's going east again, to wherever the locusts didn't reach, wherever there's still harvest work to be done. "I'll send money when I can," he says. "I'll be back before winter." You nod. You help him pack. You watch him walk away down the road, and you stand there until he's out of sight. And then you go back into the house, and you close the door, and you realize something that makes your blood run cold. You're not alone in this house. The locusts are still here. Not the adults. Not even the nymphs, most of which have moved on or died. But the eggs. There are still eggs in the ground. From this year's nymphs, which matured and laid their own eggs before moving on. You're living on top of billions of unhatched locusts, and next spring they're going to hatch again. This isn't a 2-year disaster. This is a cycle, and you're trapped in it. Welcome to the frontier, Carolyn. Isn't it everything you dreamed? You're alone. It's been 3 weeks since Charles left, and you're standing by Plum Creek with 2 water buckets, and you're doing math in your head. The kind of math that no one teaches you in school. 4 people need approximately 8 gallons of water per day. That's for drinking, cooking, washing dishes, basic hygiene. 8 gallons is roughly 64 pounds. You have 2 buckets. Each full bucket weighs about 20 pounds. That's 4 trips to the creek per day, minimum. 80 pounds of water hauled up the creek bank, carried to the house, poured into the barrel by the stove. Every single day. And that's just water. There's also wood for the stove. You need enough to cook 3 meals plus heat water for washing. That's maybe 20 pounds of wood per day. The nearest deadfall timber is a quarter-mile away. Then there's food. You have flour, not much but some, beans, a little cornmeal. You're stretching it by making bread that's more water than flour, soup that's more broth than beans. You calculate how many days the supplies will last if you feed the girls adequately and yourself barely at all. 43 days, maybe, if you're careful. Charles has been gone 21 days. He said he'd be back before winter. Winter starts in November. It's August now. That's at least 90 days. The math doesn't work, but you're going to make it work anyway, because that's what you do. That's what women have always done. Take impossible arithmetic and make it add up through sheer force of will. You pick up the buckets and start walking back to the house. Let me tell you what frontier women's work actually looks like. Because the books, Laura's books, all the pioneer books, they make it sound almost quaint, wholesome, industrious women cheerfully churning butter and baking bread and singing while they work. The reality is different. You wake up at dawn because sleeping past sunrise is wasting daylight you can't afford to waste. The first thing you do is restart the fire in the stove, which means you went to bed with just enough embers banked to catch in the morning because starting a fire from scratch takes time and matches cost money. You haul water, 4 trips to the creek, every morning before you can even start breakfast. You make breakfast. Cornmeal mush if you have cornmeal, bread and weak tea if you don't. You feed the girls. You eat whatever's left, which is usually not much. You clean up. Dishes washed in water you already used once for cooking because you can't afford to waste clean water on dishes when you'll just have to haul more. You do laundry. This is an all-day affair that happens once a week if you're lucky. You heat water in the big pot on the stove. You scrub clothes on a washboard until your knuckles are raw and bleeding. You rinse them in cold creek water. You wring them out, and wringing out heavy wet fabric by hand will give you forearms like a blacksmith, and hang them to dry. By the time laundry is done, it's mid-afternoon and you haven't eaten since breakfast and you're so tired you can barely stand, but you can't stop, because you still need to make dinner, and haul more water, and mend the hole in Mary's dress. And check the garden for anything at all that might be edible, and put the girls to bed, and clean up again. By the time you fall into bed, you've been working for 16 hours straight, and tomorrow you'll do it all again. This is what pioneer spirit actually means. It means work so grinding, so relentless, so exhausting, that it breaks your body and numbs your mind, and you do it alone, because your husband is 300 miles away and you have no choice. Mary and Laura walk to school every day. It's 1.5 miles to Walnut Grove, 3 miles round trip. You watch them leave in the morning carrying their slates and their lunch pails, which contain less food than they should because you're rationing, and you feel a complicated mix of relief and guilt. Relief because while they're at school you only have Carrie to watch. Guilt because they're walking 3 miles in worn-out shoes and you can't afford to buy new ones. Mary is 10 now. She's serious, studious, the kind of child who actually likes school. The teacher, a young woman not much older than you were when you were teaching, has mentioned that Mary is exceptional. She reads above her grade level. She helps the younger children with their lessons. You're proud of her, but you also see the future closing in around her, the way it closed in around you. Because exceptional or not, Mary is a girl. And girls on the frontier have limited options. They can be wives, they can be mothers, they can be teachers, but only until they marry. And then their lives become what yours has become. Laura is different. She's 8. And she's wild in a way that Mary never was. She'd rather be outside than in, rather be exploring the creek than sitting still in a classroom. But she's sharp. She notices everything. She remembers everything. Sometimes you catch her watching you with those serious grey eyes, and you wonder what she's thinking. What she's learning from watching you haul water and make meals from nothing and hold the family together while Charles is gone. You wonder if she's learning resilience, or if she's learning that being a woman means a life of invisible labour and unspoken suffering. Carrie is 5. She's small for her age, and she still needs you constantly. She's frightened when you're out of sight. She cries easily, and you try to be patient with her, you really do. But there are days when you're so tired that even her small voice asking, "Mama," makes you want to scream. You never do. You swallow it down. You pick her up and comfort her and tell her everything is fine, because that's what mothers do. They lie to their children to keep them from being afraid. There's a woman in Walnut Grove named Mrs. Badal. Her husband runs the post office, and she has 4 children, all under the age of 12. You see her sometimes at church on Sundays, and one day in September she stops you after the service. "How are you managing?" she asks quietly. You open your mouth to say fine, but she holds up a hand. "Don't," she says. "Don't tell me you're fine. I know Charles is gone. I know you're alone with the girls. I know you're living on credit and prayers." You stare at her. Women don't talk like this. Women don't acknowledge the reality of each other's suffering. It's too dangerous, too close to admitting that the whole system is broken. But Mrs. Badal is looking at you with such frank understanding that something in you cracks. "I'm so tired," you hear yourself say, and she nods. "I know. I don't know how much longer I can do this. I know. I'm terrified he's not coming back. I know." She takes your hand. Her palm is as calloused as yours, her knuckles just as raw. "We're going to help each other," she says. "The women here. We're going to share what we have. Food, information, work. If you need help, you ask. If I need help, I'll ask you. Agreed?" You nod, unable to speak past the lump in your throat. "And Caroline," she adds, "if you need to scream or cry or break something, you come to my house, not in front of the children, not in front of the men, but you come to me and you let it out. Because if you don't, it'll kill you." "What about you?" you ask. She smiles, and it's the saddest smile you've ever seen. "I scream into my pillow at night," she says. "After everyone's asleep, it helps." And then she squeezes your hand and walks away to collect her children. This is the thing they don't write about in the pioneer stories. The women's networks, the quiet systems of mutual support that keep families alive when the men are gone. Mrs. Badal brings you a loaf of bread one week. You bring her eggs from the few chickens you manage to keep alive. Another woman, Mrs. Nelson, whose husband farmed 2 miles south, watches Carrie one afternoon so you can do laundry without interruption. When Mrs. Nelson's youngest gets sick, you and 2 other women take turns sitting with her so Mrs. Nelson can sleep. When the storekeeper's wife has a baby, every woman in the community brings food for a week so she doesn't have to cook. It's not organised. There's no formal system. But everyone knows when disaster strikes, and on the frontier disaster is constant, the women will handle it. The men leave to find work, to search for opportunity, to chase their dreams. The women stay, and they take care of each other. Because if they don't, everyone dies. By October, you've developed a numbness that you suspect is the only thing keeping you sane. Worry, you don't let yourself think about Charles, about whether he's safe, whether he's earning enough money, whether he's coming back. You don't let yourself think about the debt, the hundreds of dollars you owe for lumber, for supplies, for everything you've bought on credit over the past year. You don't let yourself think about next spring when the eggs will hatch again. You just move through the days like a machine, haul water, make food, wash clothes, put children to bed, sleep, wake up, do it again. The girls notice. Of course they notice. You're quieter than you used to be, less patient. You don't sing anymore while you work. You don't tell stories at bedtime as often. One night, Mary comes to you while you're washing dishes. "Ma," she says softly, "are you sad?" And you freeze, because you can't tell her the truth. Or you can't tell a 10-year-old that you're drowning in despair, that you're barely holding on, that sometimes you stand by Plum Creek and think about just walking into the water and not coming back. So you dry your hands and turn to her and smile. "I'm just tired, sweetheart," you say. "Everything's fine." She looks at you for a long moment, and you can see in her eyes that she doesn't believe you. She's too smart to believe you. But she nods anyway, because she's learning the same lesson you learned at her age. Women lie about being fine. It's how we survive. "All right, Ma," she says, and goes back to help Laura with her slate. And you turn back to the dishes and hate yourself for teaching your daughter that lesson. Charles comes home in late November just as the first snow is falling. You hear the sound of footsteps on the porch and your heart leaps, because for 4 months you've been terrified that you'd never hear those footsteps again. The door opens and he's there, thinner, more weathered, but alive. The girls shriek and run to him, and he hugs them and swings Carrie up into his arms, and for a moment it's like everything is okay again. He looks at you over their heads. "Caroline," he says. "Charles," you reply. And in that exchange you both understand what the other has been through. His months of walking and working and sleeping in barns, your months of alone and afraid and barely surviving. That night, after the girls are asleep, he counts out the money he earned. $43, 4 months of work, 300 miles of walking, and he has $43. It's not enough. Not nearly enough to cover the debts. Not enough to buy supplies for winter. Not enough to pay for the land. But it's something. "I'm sorry," he says quietly. "I tried to earn more, but wages were low. Everyone's desperate for work." You nod. You don't tell him that $43 wouldn't matter if it was $400. That the problem isn't the amount. The problem is the situation you're in, the cycle you're trapped in, the system that's designed to break people like you. Instead you say, "We'll make it work," because that's what you always say. And he looks at you with such gratitude, such relief, that you've forgiven him for leaving, for not earning more, for getting you into this mess in the first place. But you haven't forgiven him. You're just too tired to fight. "Next year will be different," he says. "The grasshoppers can't come back 3 years in a row. It's not possible." And you want to scream. You want to shake him and demand to know how many times things have to fall apart before he stops believing that next time will be different. But you don't. You just nod. "Yes," you say. "Next year." And you lie down next to him in the beautiful house you can't afford, on the land covered in locust eggs, in the middle of a disaster that shows no signs of ending. And you close your eyes and try to sleep. But all you can think is, I don't know how many more next years I have in me. Winter comes again, and with it, a silence that feels like suffocation. You're standing at the window of your frame house, the beautiful, expensive house that you can't afford, and you're watching snow fall across the field where Charles planted wheat 3 times and harvested nothing. It's January 1876. You're 36 years old. You've been in Walnut Grove for 20 months, and you know with a certainty that sits in your chest like a stone that you're going to leave. Not because you want to, but because there's no other choice. The debt is too high, the land is worthless, and spring is coming, which means the eggs are going to hatch again. 3rd time's the charm, they say. They lied. Let me tell you what the 3rd year of a disaster does to a person. The 1st year is shock and fear. You're terrified, but you still believe it's temporary. You still think you can recover. This 2nd year is exhausting struggle. You're tired, but you're still fighting. You're still trying to make it work. The 3rd year? The 3rd year is when something inside you breaks. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just a quiet snapping, like a thread pulled too tight for too long, and suddenly you're not fighting anymore. You're just existing. Going through the motions, because stopping would mean admitting defeat, and you're not ready to do that yet. But you're not hoping anymore either. Hope requires energy, and you don't have any left. You move through the winter like a ghost in your own life. You haul water because water needs hauling. You make food because the girls need feeding. You mend clothes because clothes need mending. But you're not there, not really. Part of you, the part that used to dream, that used to plan, that used to believe things could get better, has gone somewhere else. Somewhere you can't feel anything. The women at church notice. Mrs. Bedell pulls you aside one Sunday. "Carolyn," she says quietly, "are you sleeping?" You shake your head, because you're not. You lie awake most nights staring at the ceiling, listening to Charles snore and the girls breathe, and you think about nothing. Just blank, empty nothing. "You need to see someone," she says. There's no one to see, you reply. And it's true. There's no doctor in Walnut Grove who treats women's minds. There's no one who would understand that you're drowning on dry land, that you're suffocating in open air. And even if there were, you couldn't afford it. Mrs. Bedell squeezes your hand. She doesn't say anything else, because what is there to say? You're both trapped. You're all trapped. Every woman on this frontier, every wife watching her husband's dreams turn to dust, every mother trying to keep her children fed and clothed and safe in a place that doesn't care whether any of you survive. And the world calls this adventure, calls it the pioneer spirit, calls it building a nation. You call it hell. Spring arrives, and with it, the inevitable. Charles plants wheat again, because what else is he going to do? The land is still there, the seeds are cheap, and if he doesn't plant something, you'll have nothing at all, so he plants. And you watch him work and you feel nothing. Not hope, not fear, just numbness. Mary and Laura help in the garden. They're 11 and 9 now, old enough to be genuinely useful. Mary is still your serious, careful daughter. Laura is still your wild one, though she's been quieter lately. You think maybe she senses what's coming. Carrie is 6, and she's the only one who still seems unaffected by the weight pressing down on all of you. She plays with her rag doll, chatters about things that don't matter, smiles for no reason. You're grateful for her innocence, and terrified of the day she'll lose it. In April, the eggs hatch. You're almost relieved when it happens, because at least now you know. At least the waiting is over. The nymphs emerge from the soil, millions of them, and they start eating. Not as many as last year. Some of the eggs didn't survive the winter, but enough. More than enough. Charles tries the same defences he tried before. Tar trenches, hopper dozers, burning. Nothing works. It never works. By June, the wheat is gone. Again. And this time Charles doesn't even look surprised. He just stands in the ruined field and stares at the ground, and you can see in his face that he's finally understood what you've known for months. This is over. All of it. The farm, the dream, the life you were trying to build. Over. On July 7th, 1876, Charles does something that will define the rest of your lives. He goes to the land office in New Ulm and completes the purchase of your preemption claim, the 160 acres you've been living on for 2 years, the land with the frame house and the ruined fields and billions of locust eggs in the soil, the government's price, $413. It's money you don't have, but Charles borrows it, from the bank, from merchants, from anyone who'll lend to a man who's failed 3 years in a row, because the only way to get out of this situation is to own the land free and clear so you can sell it. So he buys it. And on the same day, the very same day, he sells it to a man named Abraham Keller. Sale price, $400. You lost $13. After 2 years of work, after building a house, after 3 destroyed wheat crops, after all the water you hauled and meals you cooked and endless days of labour, you lost $13. But it's worse than that, because you still owe money for the lumber, for the supplies, for everything you bought on credit over the past 2 years. The $400 from the land sale, that goes straight to creditors, and it's not enough to cover what you owe, so you're leaving Walnut Grove not just broke. You're leaving in debt. Congratulations. You've perfected the art of financial ruin. You start packing in late July. The girls don't understand at first. They've lived here longer than they've lived anywhere. This is home, as much as any place has ever been home. Where are we going? Laura asks. Iowa, Charles says. A place called Burr Oak. There's work there. A hotel that needs help running it. But what about the house? Mary asks. What about the garden? Someone else will live here now, you say quietly. We're starting over. Laura's face hardens. Even at 9, she understands what that means. Another move, another new place, another round of being the new family, the poor family, the family that doesn't quite fit. Carrie starts crying. She doesn't want to leave her plum thickets, her creek, the only home she really remembers. And you? You feel nothing. You're so far past feeling that you've forgotten what it's like to care about leaving or staying or anything at all. You pack your few possessions, the dishes, the linens, the girls' clothes, Charles's tools. Everything you own fits in one wagon. 2 years of your life reduced to a pile of household goods. The neighbours come to say goodbye. Mrs. Badal brings bread for the journey. Mrs. Nelson brings preserves. Other women you barely know bring small gifts, worthless things that mean everything. A handkerchief, a jar of honey, a packet of seeds. They don't say, good luck. They don't say, we'll miss you. They say, I'm sorry. Because they understand. They know this could be them next year or the year after. They know you're not leaving because you want to. You're leaving because you have to. Because you failed. And on the frontier, failure means you move on. You leave on a morning in early August. The sky's blue and cloudless, the kind of beautiful summer day that feels like mockery. Charles helps you into the wagon. The girls climb in behind you. Your entire life is in the wagon bed, covered with canvas. You take one last look at the frame house, the house Charles built with his own hands, the house you thought would finally be home, and you feel nothing. Charles clicks to the horses, and the wagon starts moving. Down the road, past the fields you planted, past Plum Creek where the girls used to play, past the plum thickets heavy with fruit you won't harvest. Past the dugout where you lived that first summer, when you still had hope. The girls are quiet. Even Carrie has stopped crying. They're watching the landscape slide by, watching their world disappear behind them, and you're thinking about numbers. 3 years, 3 wheat crops planted, 0 harvests, $413 paid for land, $400 received, $13 lost, plus hundreds more in unpaid debts, 2 years of hauling water, cooking meals, washing clothes, raising children, holding everything together while your husband chased dreams that turned to dust. And for what? For nothing. For less than nothing. For debt and failure, and the certainty that you'll never stop moving, never find stability, never have a life that isn't defined by loss. You're 36 years old. You've been married for 16 years, and you failed again. This is the story Laura will never write about. Oh, she'll mention leaving Walnut Grove in passing. She'll say the family moved to Iowa for a while. But she'll skip over this part, the leaving, the debt, the mathematical proof of total economic collapse. Because this part isn't romantic. This part isn't inspiring. This part doesn't fit the narrative of pioneer resilience and American dreams. This part is just sad. You're halfway to your brother-in-law Peter's place in Zumbro Falls, where you'll stop before continuing to Burr Oak, when you notice that the baby isn't right. Charles Frederick, Freddy, born November 1st, 1875, in the beautiful house you've just abandoned. He's 9 months old, your only son, the child you barely had energy to care for because you were drowning in your own despair. He's been fussy all morning, but you thought it was just the heat, the discomfort of travelling. Now you realise it's more than that. He's burning with fever. You pull him to your breast, trying to nurse him, but he won't latch. His little face is flushed, his breathing rapid and shallow. Charles, you say, and your voice sounds strange even to your own ears. Flat, empty. The baby's sick. Charles stops the wagon. He reaches back to feel Freddy's forehead, and you see his face go pale. How long has he been like this? I don't know, you say. And it's true, you don't know. Because you've been so numb, so absent, that you missed your own baby getting sick. Charles drives faster. You hold Freddy against you. Trying to cool him with damp cloths, trying to get him to drink water, trying anything. But you already know. You can feel it in the weight of his small body, in the way his breathing gets slower, shallower. You reach Peter's place on August 27th, 1876. You carry Freddy inside, and Peter's wife Eliza takes one look at him and sends for the nearest doctor. But there's nothing the doctor can do. Whatever illness took hold of your baby, some infection, some fever, some consequence of being born into a family that was falling apart, it's too far gone. Freddy dies in your arms on the same day you arrive, 9 months old, your only son, and you feel nothing. Not because you don't love him, but because you're so far beyond feeling that even this, even the death of your child, can't penetrate the numbness that swallowed you whole. Numbed, you hold his small, cooling body, and you think, I couldn't even keep him alive. You couldn't save the crops, couldn't save the farm, couldn't save your family from debt and failure, and you couldn't save your son. The women around you are crying. Eliza, the neighbours who've come to help, they're weeping for your loss, for the tragedy of it. But you just sit there holding Freddy, and you feel like you're watching yourself from very far away. This is what breaking looks like. Not dramatic, not violent, just a woman sitting in a chair, holding her dead baby, feeling nothing at all. They bury Freddy somewhere near South Troy, Minnesota. You're not even sure exactly where. Years later, people will search for his grave and never find it. Because he was just another frontier child who died, another small tragedy in a landscape full of them. You don't cry at the burial. You stand there, holding Mary and Laura and Carrie, and you watch them lower the small coffin into the ground, and you feel nothing. Charles is devastated. You can see it in his face, in the way his shoulders shake. He's crying for his son, for everything you've lost. But you're empty. After the burial, you get back in the wagon and continue to Burr Oak. Because what else are you going to do? You can't stay here. You can't go back. You can only move forward. The girls are quiet. They've just lost their baby brother. They've just watched their parents bury a child, and they're learning what you learned long ago. The frontier doesn't care about your grief. It just keeps moving. And you move with it or you die. You arrive in Burr Oak in September. Charles has a job lined up at a hotel, helping run it. You'll cook and clean and do laundry for hotel guests. It's the same work you've been doing all along. Hauling water, making meals, washing clothes, keeping house. Except now you're doing it for strangers, and you're being paid for it. Welcome to the rest of your life, Carolyn. Here's what the books don't tell you. Here's what Laura will leave out when she writes about her childhood decades later. They don't tell you about the third year, the year when hope finally dies, the year when you realise that all the optimism and hard work and pioneer spirit in the world can't save you if the world itself is against you. They don't tell you about the women who break, who stop speaking, who walk out into the prairie and don't come back, who are labelled hysterical or mad because Victorian society has no language for the depression and trauma that comes from years of impossible labour and repeated loss. They don't tell you about the babies who die, the small graves scattered across the frontier, unmarked and forgotten, because infant mortality is so common that it barely registers as tragedy anymore. They don't tell you about the debt, the families who leave their homesteads bankrupt, who owe more than they can ever repay, who fail not because they didn't work hard enough, but because the system was designed to break them. And they don't tell you about women like you, women who survive, who keep cooking and cleaning and caring for children and holding everything together even after they've broken inside. Because that's what women do. That's what you were taught. That's what society demands. You survive, but you don't live. Not really. Not anymore. You're standing in a hotel kitchen in Burr Oak, Iowa, and your hands are in dishwater so hot it's scalding your skin. It's September 1876. You buried your baby 3 weeks ago. You left your home, the beautiful house Charles built, the land you worked, the community you'd started to become part of, and now you're washing dishes for strangers. Welcome to stability. Because here's the thing, nobody tells you about economic collapse. Sometimes the only way to survive is to take the life you've been living, the domestic labour you've been doing for free for 16 years, and sell it. Cooking? That'll be wages now. Cleaning? Someone will pay for that. Laundry? Suddenly worth money. Childcare? Finally compensated. It's the same work you've been doing all along. Hauling water, making meals, scrubbing floors, washing clothes until your knuckles crack and bleed. But now you're doing it for other people's families, other people's comfort, other people's convenience, and the world calls this progress. The Masters Hotel is a modest 2-story building in the centre of Burr Oak. William Masters owns it, and he's hired Charles to help manage it. Which means Charles handles the books, does repairs, greets guests. And you do everything else. You cook 3 meals a day for however many guests are staying, anywhere from 5 to 20 people. You wash their dishes, you clean their rooms, you do their laundry, you make their beds, and you're paid for it. Not much. Room and board for your family plus a small wage. But it's steady. It's reliable. And after 3 years of watching crops fail, of accumulating debt, of living on credit and prayers, steady feels like luxury, even if it's humiliating. Because you see the way the hotel guests look at you. You're the help now. The hired woman. The one who serves their food and clears their plates and makes sure their rooms are clean. You used to be a teacher. You used to own land. You used to be a woman with a home of her own. Now you're 36 years old and you're scrubbing other people's chamber pots. But there's something Caroline doesn't know yet. Something that's happening hundreds of miles away, back in Minnesota, back in the place she barely escaped. The plague is ending. Let me tell you what's happening in Minnesota in the spring of 1877, while you're in Burr Oak washing hotel linens. The eggs hatch, just like they did in 1875 and 1876. Millions of nymphs emerge from the soil, hungry and ready to eat. But something's different this time. The swarms are smaller, less coordinated. The locusts that do appear aren't forming the massive biblical clouds that darken the sky in 1874. They're just grasshoppers. Eating crops, yes. Causing damage, yes. But not the apocalyptic devastation of the previous years. And then, in April, something extraordinary happens. Governor John Pillsbury, Minnesota's governor since January, declares April 26th, 1877 a day of prayer for relief from the grasshoppers. Churches across the state hold services. Farmers and their families gather to pray for deliverance. They ask God to end the plague that's destroyed their livelihoods for 4 years. And you know what happens? The locusts leave. The swarms diminish. The plague ends. People call it a miracle. They say God answered their prayers. They say faith saved Minnesota. But here's what actually happened. The Rocky Mountain locust was already dying. The species, Melanoplus spretus, the insect that tormented you for 3 years, was being driven to extinction by the very settlement boom it had been feeding on. As farmers ploughed the river valleys where the locust bred, as they destroyed the permanent breeding grounds in Montana and Wyoming, they were accidentally wiping out the species. Within 25 years, the Rocky Mountain locust will be extinct, gone. The last known living specimen will be collected in 1902, and after that, the species will vanish from the earth forever. But you don't know any of this. You're in Iowa, washing dishes, and you have no idea that the disaster you fled is over. You think it will last forever. You think Minnesota is still being devoured. You think you'll never be able to go back, and by the time you learn the truth, it'll be too late. Your house will belong to someone else. Your land will be someone else's farm, and you'll have spent years believing you had no choice but to leave, when if you just held on 1 more year. But you didn't know. You couldn't have known. That's the cruelest part of all this. You made the only rational decision based on the information you had, and it was the wrong one. The girls adjust to Burr Oak faster than you do. Mary is 11 now, and she's old enough to help with hotel work. She makes beds, sets tables, helps serve meals. She's serious and competent, and the guests appreciate her quiet efficiency. Laura's 9, and she's less suited to indoor work. She'd rather be outside exploring, but she does what's asked of her. She watches everything with those sharp grey eyes, and you wonder what she's learning. What she's storing away in that careful memory of hers. Carrie is 6, and she's still young enough to play. She doesn't understand what's happened to your family, doesn't grasp that you've fallen from homesteaders to hired help. She just knows there are new places to explore, new people to meet, and she doesn't remember Freddy. Not really. He was 9 months old when he died, and she was only 6. In a few years she won't remember having a brother at all. That thought makes you feel something, a flicker of emotion breaking through the numbness. Not quite grief, not quite anything, just something. You're in the kitchen one day, kneading bread dough, when Mary comes to stand beside you. "Ma," she says quietly, "are you ever going to be happy again?" You stop kneading. Your hands are buried in dough, and you're staring at the counter, and you don't know how to answer that question. Because the truth is, you don't remember what happy feels like. It's been so long since you felt anything other than numb or exhausted or quietly desperate that you're not sure you'd recognize happiness if it appeared, but you can't tell your 11-year-old daughter that. So you do what you've done 100 times before. You lie. "I'm fine, sweetheart," you say. "I'm just tired." Mary looks at you for a long moment, and you can see in her face that she's old enough to know you're lying, old enough to understand that something in you broke back in Minnesota, and it hasn't healed. But she's also smart enough not to push. So she just nods and goes back to setting tables, and you go back to kneading bread and you think, this is my life now. This is all it will ever be. But there's something you don't realise, something you can't see from inside your own exhaustion and grief and numbness. Your daughter Laura is watching. She's watching everything. The way you work, the way you hold yourself together, the way you keep going even when you're broken. And decades from now, she's going to write about you. She's going to make you famous. She's going to turn your suffering into a story that millions of people will read. But she's not going to tell them the truth. She's going to sand off the rough edges, smooth over the darkness, turn your depression into stoic resilience. And the woman you actually were, the woman standing in this hotel kitchen, broken and numb and barely holding on, will disappear, replaced by a character named Mai, sweet, patient, uncomplaining, perfect, the woman who never existed. You're in the hotel parlour one evening in the spring of 1877 when you overhear a conversation between two travelling salesmen. "Heard the grasshoppers are finally gone from Minnesota," one of them says. You freeze. Your hands stop moving over the table you're wiping. "About time," the other replies. "Heard farmers were praying for relief. Guess God finally listened." Or the locusts just moved on. Either way, good news for anyone with land up there. They laugh and move on to talking about grain prices, and you stand there with your cleaning rag in your hand, and you feel something crack inside your chest. The plague is over. You left too soon. If you'd stayed, if you'd held on just one more year, you might have gotten a harvest in 1877. You might have paid off your debts. You might have kept your land, your house, your life. Instead, you're here, working in someone else's hotel, and someone else is living in the house Charles built. Someone else is farming your land. You want to scream. You want to throw something. You want to find those salesmen and demand to know if they're certain, if it's really true, if the grasshoppers are really gone, but you don't. Because you're in a hotel parlour and there are guests present and women don't make scenes. So you finish wiping the table, you carry the cleaning supplies back to the kitchen, you stand at the sink with your hands on the edge of the counter and you breathe and you think, I survived 3 years of hell for nothing. Let me tell you about the women who didn't survive. See, because for every woman like you who bent but didn't break, who kept going through sheer stubbornness, there were women who couldn't. There's a letter in the Minnesota Historical Society archives from 1875. A woman named Mary Dodge wrote to the governor, describing her situation after the locusts destroyed her family's crops. She wrote, "I have been so discouraged that I have been tempted to end my life." That's rare, that open admission of suicidal thoughts. Most women didn't write it down. They couldn't. Because admitting to mental distress was admitting to feminine weakness, to hysteria, to moral failing. But the private letters that do survive, letters between sisters, between mothers and daughters, reveal the truth. The frontier was full of women who were drowning. They called it prairie madness. That was the vernacular term for what we'd now recognise as depression, anxiety, PTSD. The isolation and the endless work, the lack of control, the constant loss, it broke women. Some of them stopped speaking, just went silent, stopped engaging with their families, stopped engaging with life. Some of them walked out into the prairie and didn't come back. Their bodies would be found days or weeks later, frozen or starved, or simply dead from giving up. Some of them harmed themselves, quietly, in ways their families could pretend were accidents. And the world said she was hysterical, she was weak, she couldn't handle frontier life. As if the problem was the women, not the impossible situation they were in. There was no treatment, no therapy, no medicine. Victorian doctors believed women's mental health problems came from their uteruses. That's where the word hysteria comes from, from the Greek word for uterus. The recommended treatment was rest, isolation, and sometimes forced institutionalization, so women didn't seek help. They couldn't. Admitting to mental distress meant being labelled mad, being locked away, losing your children, so they suffered in silence. They broke in private. They kept working and kept smiling and kept pretending everything was fine. Just like you're doing now. You're 37 years old, and your body is starting to show the cost of 16 years of relentless labour. Your hands are permanently rough, the skin cracked and dry from constant washing. Your back aches every morning from bending over stoves and sinks and laundry tubs. Your knees hurt when you climb stairs. Your shoulders are tight and painful from carrying water and wringing out wet clothes. You're aging faster than you should. The frontier does that to women. Takes years off their lives through sheer physical exhaustion. There's a mirror in the hotel, and sometimes you catch sight of yourself in it and don't recognise the woman staring back. She's too thin, too worn. There are lines around her mouth and eyes that weren't there 5 years ago. Her hair, which used to be thick and dark, is starting to grey. You're 37, you look 50, and you have decades left to live. Decades of this body breaking down, of this exhaustion becoming chronic, of this numbness becoming permanent. This is what survival looks like. Not triumph, not resilience, just grinding, relentless continuation until death finally offers an exit. But here's what you don't know. What you can't know, standing in this hotel kitchen in 1877 feeling like your life is over. You're going to leave Burr Oak. You're going to move again because Charles is always going to chase another opportunity, another fresh start. You'll end up in Dakota territory eventually, in a town called De Smet, and you'll finally find something close to stability. Your daughters will grow up. Mary will go blind from scarlet fever when she's 14, and you'll watch her navigate a world that has no patience for disabled women. But she'll survive. She'll become a teacher just like you once were. Laura will grow up sharp and observant and tough, and she'll marry a farmer named Almanzo Wilder. And after years of their own struggles, drought, debt, a disabled son, a house fire, Laura will sit down at age 63 and write about her childhood. She'll write about you, about Pa, about the little house in the big woods and the dugout on the banks of Plum Creek. She'll write about the grasshoppers, though she'll soften it, make it more adventure than trauma, and millions of people will read her books. They'll fall in love with the family she describes. They'll admire the courage, the resilience, the pioneer spirit. But they won't know the truth. They won't know about you standing in this hotel kitchen, broken and numb and barely holding on. They won't know about the baby you buried. They won't know about the debt and the failure and the years of your life that were just survival, or not living. Because Laura won't write about that part. She'll leave out Burr Oak entirely, skip right over this year like it never happened, and the woman you actually are will vanish from history, replaced by Ma, perfect, stoic, uncomplaining, the woman who never was. There's a question you should be asking, a question that won't occur to you for many years, but that matters more than almost anything else. Whose story is this? Is it yours? The life you actually lived? The suffering you actually endured? The person you actually were? Or is it Laura's? The version she'll write, the story she'll tell, the myth she'll create? Because here's the truth. You'll never write your own story. You'll never keep a diary. You'll never write letters that survive. Your voice will be filtered entirely through your daughter's memory, and she'll change things, soften things, make them more palatable, and by the time her books are published, you'll be dead. You won't get to correct the record. You won't get to say, that's not how it was. That's not who I was. The woman in the books, Ma, will become more real than you ever were, and that might be the cruelest loss of all. Not just losing your home, your stability, your baby, but losing your own story, your own truth, having it taken from you and rewritten into something more comfortable for the world to consume. But this isn't where the story ends, because there's one more thing you need to understand, one more truth that won't become clear for another 150 years. The disaster you survived? The plague that destroyed your life? It was the last of its kind. The Rocky Mountain locust, the species that tormented you, will go extinct. It will never plague anyone again. You were part of the end of something. You just didn't know it. And the question that will haunt your daughter's books, that will haunt American mythology, that will haunt everyone who reads about your family is this: what do we owe to the women who survived disasters? What do we owe to their truth? The answer, in your case, is not enough. Never enough. So whose story is this? That's the question we started with. And now, standing at the end of Caroline's experience with the grasshopper plague, we need to answer it. Because the truth is more complicated than you might think. You're Caroline Ingalls, and it's 1877, and you're in Burr Oak, Iowa. Washing hotel dishes, and you think your life is essentially over. You're 37 years old. You've lost a farm, accumulated debt, buried a baby. You're working as hired help in someone else's hotel, and you're right to think it's over. The life you imagined, the life you wanted, is dead. But you're wrong about something else. Your story isn't over. It's just beginning. You just won't be the one to tell it. Let me tell you what happens next. Not all of it, because some of it deserves its own story, its own telling, but enough to understand how we got from there to here. You leave Burr Oak, of course you do. Charles is restless again, and there's a new opportunity, and you pack up the wagon and move. Again. This time you go back to Walnut Grove briefly, just for a year. 1877 to 1878. And it must have been strange seeing the town again, seeing the land you used to own, seeing the house Charles built now occupied by Abraham Keller's family, walking past your old life like it's a museum exhibit, but you don't stay. Because in 1879, Charles hears about a new opportunity. A railroad is being built through Dakota Territory, and they need men to work the camps, and there's a chance, another chance, always another chance, to claim land, to start fresh. So you go. You load up the wagon, less stuff now, because you've learned not to accumulate things you'll just have to abandon, and you move to Dakota Territory, to a place that will eventually be called De Smet. And that's where your story intersects with something else, something darker, something that will make the grasshopper plague look almost easy by comparison. But we'll get to that. That's a different story. That's next time. For now, you need to know this. You find something in Dakota that you never found anywhere else. Stability, not prosperity, not wealth, not the life you dreamed of when you were a young teacher in Wisconsin, but stability. A house that stays standing, a community you become part of, a place where you finally stop moving. Charles builds a house in De Smet. You live there for the rest of your life, but there's something else you need to know, something that happens in 1879 shortly after you arrive in Dakota Territory. Mary goes blind. Your daughter Mary, your serious, careful, studious daughter, the one who loved to read, who wanted to be a teacher like you once were, the one who was going to have opportunities you never had. She gets scarlet fever in the winter of 1879 to 1880. She's 14 years old, and the fever takes her sight, not all at once, gradually, over weeks. You watch your daughter's world narrow and darken, and there's nothing you can do. She'll never read again, never see again, never have the independence you desperately wanted for her. And you who have already lost so much, have to watch your daughter lose the future she should have had. You take care of her. For the rest of your life, Mary will be partially dependent on you. You'll help her learn to navigate the world without sight. You'll help her get to the Iowa College for the Blind, where she'll get an education. You'll help her become a teacher, though she'll never have her own classroom. And you'll carry the weight of one more loss, one more thing the frontier took from you, but there's something you don't know yet, something you won't know for another 40 years. Your daughter Laura is watching, again, always watching, and she's going to remember all of this, the grasshoppers, the baby who died, the moves, Mary's blindness, your quiet suffering, and she's going to write it down, but not yet, not for a long time. Charles dies on June 8th, 1902. He's 66 years old. You've been married for 42 years, and you're alone. Not really alone. Your daughter's nearby, your grandchildren visit. but the man who dragged you across the frontier for 4 decades, who built houses you couldn't keep and planted crops that failed, who made decisions without consulting you and chased dreams that turned to dust, that man is gone, and you feel, what? Relief? Grief? Exhaustion? All of it. None of it. Everything in between. You live another 22 years as a widow, 22 years in the house in De Smet, watching the town grow around you, watching your grandchildren grow up, watching the world change in ways you never imagined. Automobiles appear on the streets, airplanes fly overhead, the telephone connects people across impossible distances. The world you were born into, the world of covered wagons and dugouts and frontier isolation, becomes history. You become history. On April 20th, 1924, you die. You're 84 years old. You've lived through the Civil War, the Grasshopper plagues, the settlement of the American West, World War I. Though you're buried next to Charles in the De Smet cemetery, and that's where your story should end. Except it doesn't. Because 6 years after you die, your daughter Laura starts writing. She's 63 years old. She and her husband Almanzo have their own history of hardship, drought, debt, the death of a son, a house fire. They're living on a small farm in Missouri, and Laura needs money. So she sits down and writes about her childhood. She writes about the little house in the big woods of Wisconsin. She writes about the Prairie in Kansas. She writes about Plum Creek and the dugout and the grasshoppers. She writes about you. But here's the thing. You're not there to tell her what it was really like. You've been dead for 6 years. You never kept a diary. You never wrote letters that survived. Your voice is gone. So Laura writes from memory, from her perspective as a child watching her mother, from impressions and feelings and the stories Charles used to tell, and she changes things. She softens the edges. She makes the suffering more bearable, the hardship more romantic. She turns despair into resilience, depression into stoicism. She turns you into Ma. Ma who never complains. Ma who never breaks down. Ma who makes do with a smile and a song. Ma who is patient and kind and endlessly capable. Ma who isn't quite human. And the real Caroline, the woman who stood in a dugout covered in locusts, the woman who buried a baby, the woman who washed dishes in a hotel while numbness ate her alive, that woman disappears. Laura never writes about Burr Oak. She skips that year entirely. Jumps from Walnut Grove to Dakota Territory like the gap never existed. Why? Maybe because it was too painful. Maybe because it didn't fit the narrative. Maybe because working as a hotel servant wasn't romantic enough for a pioneer story. But by leaving it out, she erases a crucial part of your experience, the part where you hit rock bottom, the part where the pioneer dream revealed itself as a lie, and you're not there to say, no, tell them the truth. Tell them about Burr Oak. Tell them I almost didn't survive. So that part of your story vanishes. The books are published in the 1930s and 1940s. They become wildly popular. Millions of copies sold. Generations of children grow up reading about Laura and Mary and Ma and Pa and the little houses, and they fall in love with Ma. Sweet. Perfect. Uncomplaining Ma. But they never meet Caroline, the real Caroline. The one who broke and kept going. The one who survived things that should have killed her. The one who sacrificed everything and got almost nothing in return. That woman is gone, replaced by a character in a children's book. And this is what happens to women's stories, over and over again, throughout history. The woman lives, she suffers, she endures, she survives, and then someone else, usually a man, but sometimes a daughter, sometimes a son, writes her story, and they change it, they soften it, they make it more palatable, they sand off the rough edges and the darkness and the uncomfortable truths. And the woman herself, the actual human being who lived and suffered and endured, vanishes, replaced by a character, a symbol, a myth. And by the time anyone realizes what's been lost, it's too late. The real woman is dead. Her voice is gone, and all we have left is the story someone else told about her. Let me tell you about the other Carolines, because she wasn't alone. She wasn't unique. there were thousands, tens of thousands of women like her. Women who moved to the frontier because their husbands decided to. Women who did decades of unpaid domestic labour. Women who lost children to disease and accidents and the simple brutality of frontier life. Women who broke under the weight of isolation and hardship and lack of control. And almost none of them left records. Almost none of them wrote diaries or letters that survived. Almost none of them had daughters who became famous authors. So their stories are gone. Oh, completely gone. We know they existed. We have census records, grave markers, occasional mentions in other people's letters, but their voices, their inner lives, their actual experiences, erased. History is full of these ghosts, women who lived and suffered and died without anyone recording what it was like to be them. And Caroline almost became one of them. She would have, if Laura hadn't written the books. But even then, even with the books, the real Caroline is mostly lost. Because the books tell Laura's version, filtered through a child's perspective and an adult's need to create a coherent narrative. The real Caroline, the one who stood in that hotel kitchen feeling nothing, the one who contemplated walking into Plum Creek and not coming back, the one who was so tired she forgot what it felt like to be anything but tired, that Caroline exists only in fragments, in the gaps between what Laura wrote, in the silences. So why does this matter? Why am I telling you this story, tonight, more than 150 years after Caroline stood in a field watching grasshoppers destroy her life? Because it's still happening. Not the grasshoppers. The Rocky Mountain locust is extinct. That particular disaster is over. But the pattern, the system that broke Caroline, that's still here. Climate disasters still disproportionately affect women. When hurricanes hit, when wildfires burn, when floods destroy communities, women bear the brunt of the recovery work. The cooking, the cleaning, the childcare, the emotional labour of holding families together. And it's still invisible, still unpaid, still taken for granted. Women's mental health is still stigmatised, still pathologised. Women who admit to depression or anxiety are still labelled hysterical, still told they're being dramatic, still denied the help they need. Economic precarity is still gendered. Women are still more likely to be poor, to work for lower wages, to do unpaid care work that never shows up in economic statistics, and women's voices are still being erased, still being filtered through other people's perspectives, still being rewritten to be more comfortable, more palatable, more convenient for the people in power. The specifics have changed, but the pattern hasn't. And that's why Caroline's story matters. Not because it's unique, but because it's not. Because she represents thousands of women whose stories were lost, and millions of women whose stories are still being erased today. Here's what we owe to Caroline Ingalls, to the real Caroline, not Ma. We owe her the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it doesn't fit the narrative we want to tell about pioneer resilience and American dreams. We owe her the acknowledgement that she suffered, that the frontier broke her, that she survived, but at a cost that should never have been asked. We owe her the recognition that her labour mattered, that the water she hauled, and the meals she cooked, and the clothes she washed, and the children she raised, and the grief she carried, all of it mattered, even though she was never paid for most of it, even though history barely recorded it. We owe her the understanding that her silence wasn't strength, it was oppression. She didn't choose to be stoic, she was forced to be, because Victorian society gave her no other option, and we owe her this. We remember the real woman, not the sanitized version, not the myth, not Ma, Caroline, the teacher who gave up her career when she married, the woman who moved 17 times in 30 years because her husband kept chasing dreams, the mother who buried a baby and watched another daughter go blind, the woman who broke and kept going because she had no choice. That woman. She deserves to be remembered as she was, not as Laura made her, not as history would prefer her to be, as she was, flawed, exhausted, sometimes bitter, sometimes numb, sometimes barely holding on, human. But there's something else you need to know, something I haven't told you yet. Caroline's story with the grasshoppers, the 3 years in Walnut Grove, the disaster, the departure, that's over. But her frontier story, That's not over. Because in 1879, when the family moves to Dakota Territory, something happens. Something Laura will write about in a book called By the Shores of Silver Lake. Something that almost kills Caroline. Not grasshoppers this time, not locusts. Something else. Something harder to see but just as devastating. The railroad camps, the isolation, the brutal winters, and a kind of exhaustion that goes beyond physical. The exhaustion of a woman who's given everything and has nothing left. Laura will write about those years. She'll write about Silver Lake and the railroad and the town of De Smet being built. She'll write about the long, terrible winter of 1880 to 1881 when the town nearly starved. But what she won't write about, what she can't write about because she was a child and didn't fully understand, is what it cost Caroline, what it cost to keep going when you're already broken, what it cost to survive one more disaster when you've already survived too many. That's a story that needs telling. That's a story for next time. For now, this is what you need to remember. Caroline Ingalls was born on December the 12th, 1839, in Brookfield, Wisconsin. She was a teacher. She married Charles Ingalls on February 1st, 1860. She gave birth to 5 children. 1 died in infancy. She moved more than a dozen times across the frontier. She survived 3 years of grasshopper plagues that destroyed her family's crops and drove them into debt. She buried a baby boy named Freddy. She worked as a hotel servant. She watched her daughter go blind. She lived to be 84 years old, and she never wrote any of this down herself. Everything we know about her comes filtered through other people, mostly through Laura, some through census records and land claims and gravestones. But her voice, her actual voice, her thoughts, her feelings, her inner life, that's mostly lost. And that's the tragedy. Not the grasshoppers, not the poverty, not even the death of her son. The tragedy is that we'll never know what Caroline Ingalls actually thought about any of it. We'll never know if she regretted marrying Charles, if she resented the moves, if she blamed him for the failures, if she mourned the teaching career she gave up, if she lay awake at night and thought about walking away from all of it. We'll never know because she never got to tell us, and thousands upon thousands of frontier women, millions of women throughout history share that same silence. Their stories erased, their voices lost, their suffering unrecorded except in fragments and gaps and the spaces between other people's words. So when you read the Little House books, when you watch the shows, when you see Ma smiling sweetly and making everything right, remember this: that's not Caroline. That's a character named Ma. Caroline was real, and she suffered, and she deserved better than she got, both in life and in memory. Next time, we'll talk about what happened when the Ingalls family moved to Dakota Territory, about the shores of Silver Lake, about the railroad camps, about the winter that almost killed them all, about the thing that finally, truly, almost broke Caroline for good, about By the Shores of Silver Lake, and why that might be the darkest Little House book Laura ever wrote. That's next time. For now, drop your city and local time in the comments below. Let me know what you think about Caroline's real story, and I'll see you in the next video. Good night.